She announced my retirement at a client dinner. The client at the table had $2.3 billion in a fund only I was authorized to touch. I wasn't at the dinner. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Daniel's baseball field, engine running, radio off, watching the last of the other parents pull out of the gravel lot with their headlights cutting across the chain link backstop. Daniel was in the passenger seat. He'd gone 2 for 3. We hadn't said much. We didn't need to. My phone buzzed at 9:41 p.m. Patricia Hollis. Text message. I read it twice. She just announced your retirement. I'm not joking. Get here now. I stared at the screen. Daniel glanced over, but didn't ask. Smart kid. He knows when something has shifted. 6 minutes later, 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. Not Patricia this time. The caller ID read Khalid Al-Rashid. I picked up on the second ring. Warren. His voice was calm. It was always calm. But there was a texture underneath it I had heard maybe twice in 9 years. I am standing in the lobby of the restaurant. I excused myself from the table. I will not be returning to it. Tell me what happened. The young woman, Richard's daughter, she stood up during the second course and announced to the table that you are retiring effective next quarter. She said she would be assuming management of our allocation personally. She used the phrase generational refresh. She smiled when she said it. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Warren, did you resign? No. Did you announce a retirement? No. Then we have a problem, but not yours. Click. Daniel looked at me. Dad, you okay? Yeah, bud. I'm fine. I put the car in drive. Good game tonight. But here's what Meredith Lowe didn't know. What her father, Richard, didn't remember. What nobody at Pemberton Capital Advisors had thought about in 7 years. There was a clause. My name is Warren James Collier. I'm 49 years old, 10 years in the United States Navy, commissioned through ROTC, served as a supply officer aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, CVN 69. Separated at the rank of lieutenant commander. I joined Pemberton Capital Advisors at 33, hired as director of institutional sales. That was 16 years ago. I have one son, Daniel. He's 17. Senior year. Quiet kid. Good at math. Wants to study finance, which either means I did something right or something very wrong. He lives with me. Has since his mother died. Susan Barrett Collier, ovarian cancer. 3 years ago, I was at her bedside the night she passed. I held her hand until the monitors went flat, and then I held it for another 11 minutes because nobody told me to stop. I don't talk about Susan much. Not because I've moved on, because some things don't get smaller when you share them. They just get handled by people who don't know how to hold them. I went back to work 9 days after the funeral. Not because I wanted to. Because the Khalid relationship had a quarterly review in 12 days. And nobody else at the firm understood the reporting structure ASIA required. Nobody. That's not arrogance. That's arithmetic. The relationship with Khalid Al-Rashid started 14 years ago. A cold introduction through a conference in Geneva that I almost didn't attend because Daniel had an ear infection and Susan was exhausted. I went because Richard Lowe asked me to. I shook Khalid's hand in a hallway outside a breakout session about emerging market fixed income. We talked for 40 minutes. Not about returns, about process, about how you build systems that survive the people who build them. He was director of external allocations for the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Investment Authority. He controlled more capital than most countries' GDP. He didn't return Richard's follow-up call. He returned mine. Over 9 years, that handshake became $2.3 billion in allocated capital and $340 million in management fees for Pemberton Capital Advisors. I built that number one phone call at a time. One quarterly report at a time. One 3 a.m. call during a liquidity scare at a time. And when Susan was dying, When I missed 3 major allocation calls because I was sitting in a hospital room watching the woman I loved disappear in increments, Khalid deferred 3 major allocation decisions without being asked. He told his team in Abu Dhabi to wait. He said, "Warren will call when he is ready." That is not a business story. That is a human one. And I never forgot it. I also never forgot that I missed Daniel's last 3 baseball games before tonight. The one where he hit the double that won the playoff. The one where he struck out twice and didn't want to talk about it. The one where he looked up into the bleachers in the 3rd inning. And I wasn't there. I was there tonight. First time in 3 months. He went 2 for 3, and I was in the parking lot with the engine running when Meredith Lowe announced to a table full of institutional clients that I was stepping aside so she could take my seat. Now, let me tell you about the clause. When the Asia relationship hit its 3rd year renewal, I called my friend Thomas Reed. Tom and I served together briefly at Naval Station Norfolk before he took a legal education discharge and went to Georgetown Law. 23 years in securities and investment management law. Sharp as a scalpel and twice as quiet about it. I asked him to draft a specific provision into the investment management agreement between Pemberton Capital Advisors and the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Investment Authority. Section 9, Paragraph 4, C. It's called a personal relationship designation. The language is precise. Tom made sure of that. In the event of the separation, retirement, or reassignment of the named relationship officer, Warren James Collier, without prior written consent of the authority reserves the unilateral right to withdraw the full allocation with 72 hours formal notice and without penalty. I suggested the clause. Khalid's legal team approved it. Richard Lowe signed it. Richard did not read it carefully. He never imagined I would leave. He never imagined I would be pushed out. He looked at the signature page, saw the renewal terms, and signed. That was 7 years ago. The executed agreement sat in a filing cabinet in my home office. Old Navy habit. When you spend 10 years managing supply chains for 5,000 people on a carrier, you learn one rule above all others. Always keep your copy. Every manifest, every transfer order, every receipt. You keep your copy because the day you need it is never the day you expect. I kept the agreement in a brown leather portfolio. Old, soft leather, monogrammed with my initials in gold that had mostly worn to a faint impression. Richard Lowe gave me that portfolio the day we closed the first Asia allocation. He handed it to me in his office, shook my hand, and said, "You built this, Warren. Don't ever forget that." I didn't forget. There is no irony I enjoy more, quietly, than the fact that Richard gave me the thing that holds the document that would end his firm. The night of the dinner, after I put Daniel to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with black coffee and opened the portfolio. I turned to Section 9, Paragraph 4, C, read it once, read it again, set it on the table, and leaned back. Khalid had already left the restaurant. Patricia had already texted me. Meredith had already posted to LinkedIn. 10:23 p.m. A photo from the table. Champagne glasses raised. Khalid's chair visibly empty. Exciting transitions happening at Pemberton. Grateful for the trust placed in our next generation of leadership. Big things coming. Big things coming. She had no idea. I closed the portfolio, finished my coffee, went to bed. I'd call Tom in the morning. If you've ever had a boss or been in a situation like this, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me tell you about Meredith Lowe's first day at Pemberton Capital Advisors, 13 months before the dinner. A Tuesday. She walked into the 32nd floor wearing a blazer that cost more than Patricia Hollis made in a week and carrying a MacBook Pro with a sticker on it that said, "Build Different." She was 25 then. Columbia MBA, still warm. 8 months of professional experience, all of it spent as director of digital engagement at a wellness brand called Cleanse Plus Thrive. They sold adaptogen supplements on Instagram. That was her entire professional history outside a classroom. Richard created the title for her, Vice President of Client Relations. The title didn't exist before Meredith. It was invented the way you invent a parking space. You paint the lines where you want them and pretend they were always there. Her first all-hands meeting was 11 days after she arrived. I sat in the third row. Patricia was next to me. Meredith stood at the front of the conference room, the big one, the one with the frosted glass and the mahogany table that seats 20. And she said the following words, and I am quoting from memory, because I wrote them down that night. Pemberton has an incredible legacy, but legacy without evolution is just nostalgia. What I'm proposing is a generational refresh of our entire client experience strategy. We need to modernize the portfolio of touchpoints. We need narrative control. We need fresh energy in every relationship we manage. She said this to a room full of people who had been managing institutional capital longer than she had been alive. Patricia leaned over and whispered 2 words to me. I won't repeat them, but one of them was kidding. I didn't say anything. I sat there. I listened. I watched Richard standing in the back of the room with his arms folded and a look on his face that I recognized because I'd seen it before, on the faces of fathers watching their daughters at recitals. Pride so thick it blinded him to everything else in the room. That was the first day. Over the next 12 months, Meredith held 19 meetings about client experience. She produced 4 slide decks. She launched a relationship rebranding initiative that involved redesigning the quarterly report covers to include lifestyle photography. She never once called a client. She never once sat in on an allocation review. She never once asked me how the ASIA relationship worked, what the reporting structure required, what Khalid's preferences were for communication cadence, what time zone he operated in, or why he refused to take calls from anyone at the firm except me. She didn't ask, because she didn't think she needed to. 6 weeks before the dinner, I was walking to the break room. Richard's office door was cracked open. The hallway carried sound better than people realized. Meredith's voice, clear, certain. Warren's almost 50. He's not going to reinvent himself. He needs this job. He'll fall in line. I stopped. I stood in that hallway for 12 seconds. I counted. Navy habit. When you need to stay still, you count. I waited for Richard to say something, to push back, to correct her, to say any one of the things a managing partner should say when a 26-year-old with 8 months of Instagram marketing experience dismisses the man who built 72% of the firm's revenue. Richard said nothing. That silence told me everything. I walked back to my office. I sat down. I opened my desk drawer and looked at the brown leather portfolio tucked against the side. I closed the drawer. Not yet. I learned something about Meredith's dinner plan the way I learned about most things she did. By accident. The catering invoice for the client appreciation dinner was CC'd to me through an accounting distribution list nobody had updated. I saw the date. I saw the venue. I saw the guest list. My name was not on it. Khalid Al-Rashid's name was. I read the invoice twice, closed the email, went to Daniel's baseball game. But that night, after Khalid's call from the lobby, after Patricia's text, after I put Daniel to bed and sat at the kitchen table reading Section 9, Paragraph 4, C, something had already shifted. Not broken, not cracked. Shifted. Like a hull plate on a carrier when the sea changes underneath it. You don't hear it. You feel it. Saturday morning. I was up at 6:12 a.m. Black coffee. Kitchen table. Portfolio open. At 8:15 a.m., I called Thomas Reed. He picked up on the first ring. Tom always picks up on the first ring when I call. 20 years of that. It's Warren. I know. Tell me. I told him. Everything. The dinner. Meredith's announcement. Khalid leaving the table. The LinkedIn post. The phrase generational refresh. I read him the text from Patricia, word for word. Tom was quiet for about 6 seconds. Then he said, Section 9, Paragraph 4, C. It's valid. It's been valid for 7 years. The moment she announced your retirement in front of him, the clock started. Khalid doesn't need to prove intent. He just needs to exercise the clause. And if he withdraws, 72 hours formal notice. No penalty. No arbitration window. The language is bilateral, Warren. I drafted it that way for exactly this reason. I didn't say anything. You know what she handed you, right? Tom said. They handed you a sword and called it a ceremony. Leave tonight. Not tonight. Monday. Monday. I want to do this right. At 9:30 a.m., I called Khalid. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. I did not ask him to withdraw. I did not suggest it. I told him what the clause said, because he deserved to know his options. He told me his legal team in Abu Dhabi had already been instructed. The formal withdrawal notice would be filed Monday at 10 a.m. Warren, he said, I do not do business with firms. I do business with people. This is not complicated. I understand. I know you do. That is why we are having this conversation. Monday, 10 a.m. The notice hit Pemberton's general counsel inbox like a detonation. $2.3 billion. Full withdrawal. 72 hours. No penalty. I was not in the building when it happened. I was at my kitchen table, drinking coffee, reviewing incorporation documents for Collier Sovereign Advisory LLC. Patricia texted me at 10:14 a.m. Something is happening. Richard just closed his door. His assistant looks like she's going to be sick. At 10:31 a.m., Meredith called me. I watched the phone vibrate on the kitchen table. 4 rings. 5. 6. I let it go to voicemail. At 10:47 a.m., Richard called. I watched that one too. The screen lit up with his name, and I thought about the leather portfolio he gave me, the handshake, the words, "You built this, Warren." I let it go to voicemail. By noon, Patricia said the 32nd floor sounded like an emergency room. 3 managing directors were in the main conference room with the door locked. Phones were ringing at every desk. The compliance team was pulling files. Meredith was in her office with the door shut and the blinds drawn. By Monday afternoon, 3 secondary funds began forced liquidation. The Asia allocation was the anchor for Pemberton's entire institutional portfolio. When Khalid pulled $2.3 billion, the collateral requirements on 3 linked funds collapsed. Redemption triggers fired automatically. The dominoes didn't fall. They detonated. By Wednesday, 72 hours after the withdrawal initiated, the total loss was confirmed at $410 million. 3 funds liquidated at distressed prices. Pemberton's assets under management cratered 64% in a single week. Tuesday evening, Meredith called me again. 7:38 p.m. I was sitting on the back deck with Daniel, who was doing calculus homework at the patio table, while Rex, our yellow lab, lay across his feet. The sky was going orange over the tree line. My phone buzzed on the armrest of my chair. Daniel glanced at it. Then at me. You going to answer that? I looked at the screen. Meredith Lowe. No. I set the phone face down on the armrest. Click. Wednesday morning. 6:08 a.m. I was at the kitchen table again. Coffee. Portfolio open, but I didn't need to read it anymore. I knew every word. My phone showed 23 missed calls. 14 from Meredith. 6 from Richard. 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. Pemberton's general counsel, probably, or someone from compliance scrambling to find a fire extinguisher for a building that had already burned to the foundation. 1 from Patricia, which I returned. It's bad, Warren, she said. It's really bad. The compliance team pulled the investment management agreement yesterday afternoon. Someone, I think it was the new analyst, Collins, the one who started in March, found Section 9, Paragraph 4, C, and brought it to legal. What did legal say? Margaret Whitfield read the clause out loud in the conference room. 3 managing directors, Richard and Meredith. Patricia paused. Apparently Margaret read it, stopped, read it again, and then said 2 words. Which 2 words? Oh no. I almost smiled. Almost. And then Richard asked what it meant. Margaret told him. She said the clause was valid, executed, bilateral, 7 years in the agreement, and that the moment Meredith publicly announced your separation from the firm in front of the named relationship officer's client, the withdrawal right activated. She said there was no arbitration window, no cooling period, no countermeasure. What did Meredith say? She said it was a clerical error, that contracts don't work that way, that someone must have slipped it in without authorization. And Richard? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Richard didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. Then he looked at Margaret and asked, "Did I sign this?" Margaret said yes. He asked when. She said 7 years ago. He sat down in the nearest chair and put his head in his hands. That silence again. The same silence I heard in the hallway 6 weeks before the dinner. The silence of a man who knows he stopped paying attention at the exact moment it mattered most. "Warren," Patricia said, "they're going to try to call you. Richard wants a meeting. Meredith wants to clarify the situation. Their words." "I understand." "What are you going to do?" "Exactly what I've been doing. Nothing they can see." Thursday, 2:15 p.m. Richard's personal cell. I picked up. Not because I owed him anything, because I wanted to hear him say it. "Warren." His voice sounded like it had aged 10 years in 4 days. "I need to see you. Please. 30 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "Where?" "My office. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there." Friday morning. I put on a clean shirt. Navy blue. No tie. I drove to Pemberton, parked in the visitor lot. Not the executive garage. Not anymore. And walked through the lobby entrance I hadn't used in 16 years. The security guard at the desk recognized me and nodded. He didn't ask for ID. Some things don't require paperwork. The 32nd floor was quiet. Not the productive quiet of people working. The airless quiet of people waiting for something to finish falling. Desks that used to be full had personal items in boxes. 2 offices on the south wall were already empty. I walked to Richard's corner office. The door was open. He was sitting behind his desk. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, structurally. Like the framework that held him upright for 30 years had been quietly removed. Meredith was there, standing by the window with her arms crossed. She dressed for the meeting the way she dressed for everything. Like the clothes could do the work the person inside them couldn't. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were red at the edges, but dry. She'd been crying earlier. She wasn't now. Margaret Whitfield, general counsel, sat in the chair to Richard's left. Yellow legal pad. Pen uncapped. She looked at me the way a surgeon looks at an x-ray they wish they'd ordered sooner. I sat down. Richard spoke first. "Warren, I want to start by saying that what happened at the dinner was not sanctioned by me. I did not approve the announcement. I did not know it was going to happen." "But you knew about the dinner?" He paused. "Yes. And you knew I wasn't invited." A longer pause. "Yes. And you didn't think that was worth mentioning." Richard looked at his desk, at the pen holder, at the framed photo of Meredith's MBA graduation that sat on the credenza behind him. He didn't answer. Meredith stepped forward. "Warren, this has been blown completely out of proportion. I was trying to manage a transition that was going to happen eventually anyway. You're 49. Succession planning is responsible leadership. If you'd just been part of the conversation instead of, I wasn't part of the conversation because I wasn't invited to the conversation. That's not Meredith." I looked at her. Steady. No heat. "You announced my retirement to a man who controls $2.3 billion in allocated capital. A man who has spoken to exactly one person at this firm for 9 years. A man who was sitting at that table when you told him I was leaving. And you did it without calling me, without emailing me, without confirming that I had, in fact, retired. She opened her mouth, closed it. You didn't check because you didn't think you needed to. You assumed I would fall in line. Those were your words. I heard them. 6 weeks ago. Through your father's door. The room went still. Richard looked up. You said, Warren's almost 50. He needs this job. He'll fall in line. And your father, the man who hired me, who handed me this portfolio. I held up the leather case, the gold monogram worn nearly invisible. Said nothing. Margaret Whitfield wrote something on her legal pad. The scratch of her pen was the loudest sound in the room. Section 9, paragraph 4, C, I said. Personal relationship designation. Valid for 7 years. You signed it, Richard. Tom Reed drafted it. Khalid's legal team in Abu Dhabi approved it. The clause states that in the event of my separation, retirement, or reassignment without prior written consent of the authority, the full allocation can be withdrawn with 72 hours formal notice. No penalty. No arbitration. I set the portfolio on his desk. Open to the page. The signature line. Richard's handwriting. 7 years old. Still legible. Khalid exercised the clause Monday at 10 a.m. The withdrawal is complete. The $2.3 billion is gone. 3 secondary funds have liquidated at a combined loss of $410 million. Your assets under management have declined 64% in 5 days. Margaret looked at Richard. Richard looked at the document. Meredith said, This is ridiculous. You can't just... I didn't do anything, Meredith. You did. You announced a retirement that hadn't happened to a client who had a contractual right to leave if it did. I didn't pull the trigger. You built the gun, loaded it, aimed it at your own firm, and fired it at a dinner party while posting champagne photos to LinkedIn. She stared at me. Her face drained of color the way a screen dims when the power cuts. Richard, I said, I'm sorry it happened this way. I am. You built something real here. I helped you build it, but I didn't create this situation. Your daughter did, and you let her. Richard nodded, once, slowly. I let family cloud my business judgment, he said. Quiet, almost to himself. I stood. I picked up the portfolio. I buttoned my jacket. I've registered Collier Sovereign Advisory LLC. Khalid Al-Rashid has committed a $35 million anchor allocation. I won't be soliciting Pemberton clients, but if they call me, I will answer. That's what I've always done. I walked to the door. Margaret didn't look up from her legal pad. Meredith hadn't moved from the window. Richard said, Warren. I stopped. Turned. You built this. I should have protected that. You did protect it, Richard. You just forgot you signed the protection. I left. The elevator ride down was 47 seconds. I counted. Navy habit. Within 30 days of Collier Sovereign Advisory's registration, 4 Pemberton clients followed me. They didn't follow because I asked. They followed because I picked up the phone every time it rang, for 16 years, and I gave them the truth even when the truth was expensive. Patricia Hollis came too. She walked into my office on day 12, a rented space on the 14th floor of a building 6 blocks from Pemberton, set her bag on the desk, and said, Tell me where you need me. Day 18, after the withdrawal, Richard Lowe fired Meredith in a partners meeting. Too late. The crater was already a canyon. Her LinkedIn profile was updated within the hour. She listed her title as Strategic Advisor, Independent, and posted a quote about resilience. She never mentioned Pemberton again. 11 months after the withdrawal, Pemberton Capital Advisors was acquired by Midland Coastal Bank at 0.18 on the dollar of peak valuation. Richard Lowe retired. For real this time. No announcement at a dinner. No champagne. He walked out of the building with a box under his arm and didn't look back. I heard about it from Patricia. I didn't call him. Some things don't require a phone call. They just require the record. Last Tuesday, I left the office at 4:30. Early, for me. Drove to Daniel's school. He had a game. I sat in the bleachers, third row, right behind the dugout. Rex was in the car with the windows cracked. Daniel came up to bat in the bottom of the fifth. He looked up into the stands. He saw me. He nodded. Just once. Then he stepped into the box and lined a single to right. After the game, we got gas station sandwiches and sat on the tailgate in the parking lot. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You seem different lately, Dad. Less stressed. Like you're actually here when you're here." I looked at him. 17. Smart. Watching me closer than he lets on. "I am here," I said. "Are you going to keep coming to my games?" "Everyone I can." He nodded again. Same nod. His mother's nod. That night, I sat on the back deck with 3 fingers of bourbon. The good stuff, not the daily drinker. And watched the city lights come on beyond the tree line. Rex was at my feet. The air smelled like cut grass and the last edge of summer. I thought about Richard, about Meredith, about the conference room with the frosted glass and the mahogany table, about a hallway where I stood for 12 seconds and listened to a 26-year-old with 8 months of selling supplements on Instagram explain that I would fall in line. I took a sip. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It doesn't bang on the table or make a scene at a dinner party. Sometimes it sits in a filing cabinet for 7 years, in a leather portfolio your boss gave you with his own hands, and waits. Patient, quiet, like a supply officer who learned a long time ago that the inventory is only worth something if you know exactly where it is. I knew where mine was. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.